welcome back to the Seven Deadly Sins Anime Review Episode 54. We are now on the final episode of the Seven Deadly Sins anime, which just happens to be the 100th episode of the series, which, yeah, as far as I can tell, this has never happened before. Yes. Where, as far as I can tell when it comes to anime, usually end these anime very strange numbers. Well, the last anime that I basically watched that ended was Black Clover. That ended episode 170, but episode 100? Wow, that's quite something. I'll be discussing my final thoughts on the anime in the following video. This was discussing just the final episode of the series. Excuse me. Of course, this one is discussing the epilogue arc, which I thought was 2 chapters. Turns out I was wrong. I kind of forgot about this other chapter. It was actually 3 chapters. Then starts off right after the events of last week's episode. By the way, Merlin is not in the last 3 chapters, except for some flash. She seemed like the stuff they have her in the episode is complete anime original. That actually did not happen in the manga, which I'm thinking, really? Yeah, there's actually a sequence right after she leaves from the Seven Deadly Sins, after they go back to Leonis, she goes back. We see a scene in Camelot, which is this whole scene is complete anime original. Before I get to your stuff, where we see her creation just pop up on the ground. We see a guy named Nurture, I think his name is. He's a swordsman. I think they can count him in the previous, I think it was 2 seasons back. Apparently, he decided to use his healing magic to protect a lot of the citizens of Camelot. Couldn't save all of them per se, but he took a good number of them. Good job for him. And we see Arthur and Merlin coming back, and of course, Arthur is so happy to see his people alive. It's a very brief scene, but I'm happy the fact I have a scene for Merlin. Because if if anybody's ever read the final 3 chapters, with the exception of the brief, a little bit snippet you see in the final chapter of the series, basically flashing back to one of the stuff from the previous seasons of the series, she doesn't physically appear in the last 3 chapters, which I'm thinking, really? Merlin, one of the 7 Deadly Sins, and she does not appear in the final chapters of the series. Escanor at least has a good reason. At least he appears in flashback, because he's dead. Yes. But in the case of this episode, let's talk about the Heirs that happens. Well, first aside from the Merlin, so we have the 7 Deadly Sins basically going their separate ways. We have King and Deanne preparing for the wedding. We have Elaine and Bond going on a journey. We have Gothar going on a journey. And we also have, Hawk going to Purgatory to go see his brother. Which, yeah, the scene itself is pretty much intact from the manga. And then, right after that, then we cut the head to, we cut the head to a year and a half later, which they actually cut up the scene. This was a really adorable scene of Merlin talking, not Merlin, it's actually Merlin is talking to Batra, where discuss about becoming king, but can't become king yet because they're going on their honeymoon right after their wedding, basically, for the next, year, per se, visit other places they lived for the past 3,000 years. Might take a while, but they wanted it before they become king. And, of course, Batra can rule in basically as a temporary king. They do keep in Dead Peace. I'm glad they kept the scene in. They kept a little bit out here, basically, for his reasoning for what happened in this scene. You see, he resigns from the Holy Knights. The reason why? Because the rulers are a demon and a goddess. Now, he doesn't go into full detail of why he doesn't like that in the manga, because a demon murdered his mentor, and a goddess possessed his mentor. Yes, that was mainly the reason for that. And we see his group just briefly there, and that's it. We see Salazar and one other person just capturing some bandits here and there. They're basically so bored, but he basically is so happy that he gets a chance to serve his majesty. But according to Salazar, the only king he recognizes is Batra. Now, in the case that we see the current Holy Knight, I think it's Hauser, I think it is, where he's basically training with Jericho and Gula, where Jericho gets a message that she has to go take care of something when the Fair King's Forest. The reason why is because Elaine is about to give birth. And apparently Jericho wants to be there for the birth of Bond and Elaine's child. Probably because she's going to become this child's mentor. It's also hinted later on, like right after when the kid becomes a little bit older. Apparently, it's hinted that Jericho's in love with Bond and Elaine's kid. Yeah, it's kind of weird. And it's pointed out by Elaine because apparently fairies are going from trees in the ground. Like, apparently she's become the first ever fairy to become actually pregnant with a child. Because apparently they've never done this before. Okay. And we also see Elizabeth is pregnant too. Before this, we see Bachelor, his daughters, and his daughter's boyfriends. Their daughter boyfriends basically took out gifts for the grandchild, for the new baby. And of course, he knows it's going to be a boy because he had a vision. Because of course he does. Of course he did. And of course, Bond and Melrose pick out names for their kids. Melrose picks the name Tristan, and Bond picks Lancelot. Those of you who not, I mentioned this in my reviews of these two chapters, basically of 345 last year, that if you're not familiar with the King Arthur lore, those are names of two knights under King Arthur. Yes, Lancelot, who was known as the Brave One, and Tristan, who I don't remember what his nickname was, but I remember he was one of the knights of the Round Table, which is quite cool. The fact that just by sheer coincidence that these two kids named Tristan and Lancelot don't know what the name of Deanne and King's kid is, because it's mentioned later on that King and Deanne did have a child together. Unknown what the name is, though. They don't really say. Though I think they might bring it up in the follow-up series, Seven Nights Apocalypse. Yeah, that's the sequel to this one. Though that's not come out. I don't know if that's good adapted for an anime, because the manga just started just back in January. And of course, the whole thing of when they show Elizabeth pregnant, that's actually a year and a half after what happened just after the Thief of Chaos. And then we jump ahead 10 years later. We see the anime debut of Tristan, the son of Meliodas and Elizabeth. And of course, he proclaims, "Oh no, the villains, the father is a villain." And of course, Bond points out, though, if your old man was a villain, he'd be able to be adored. And of course, he points out the fact that he's a drunk and he loves touching his mother's breast. And of course, Elizabeth is embarrassed by that. Of course, Meliodas does this dopey face, which I thought was so hilarious. The thing with him groping Elizabeth, like, they've been doing that since he was a teenager. She's had no problem with him doing it at all. At least he's not doing the thing where he's basically look under his skirt. I thought that was hilarious. And of course, apparently what's going on here in this scene is that Tristan is celebrating his 10th birthday. Which, that's interesting. And of course, Gothar gives him basically a gift. The true story of the 7 deadly sins. And it's a bunch of images we see over the course of the series. Like when Meliodas first met Elizabeth, though they technically met prior to this, basically, as he brought Elizabeth to Batra, because Batra adopted her as a baby. Though we kind of forgot, that's actually explained later on. And I love this particular sequence. You can kind of say it's mostly a lot of stock footage. It mostly is. But this whole scene is pretty much pulled directly from the manga. Then after this particular scene we have, it's where Tristan and Meliodas are just practicing with swords, and Elizabeth has made them some lunch. Now, this scene is very reminiscent of the closing of the end of chapter 1 for the series. We're on like a grassy hillside, and basically that's how the series begins. We're basically back to the beginning. Back beginning of the series. But in the case of the final episode overall, it is really, really good. I thoroughly enjoy it. And, well, next thing to talk about for this series is the movie. But before then, I don't know what the release date of this movie is. I have to take a look here about that, because I know there's a movie coming out. Let's see. let's see, I think this would probably say exactly when the movie gets released. Let me take a look here about that. Cursed by the Light. Okay, this gets released in... Oh my. This is going to release next week. Like, next Friday. Don't know when it's going to release here. I have no idea. Yeah. But I'll discuss a little more about my thoughts on the upcoming movie in the next video. But yeah, that's particularly it for this particular video. Now, next one, my final thoughts on the anime itself. Okay? Next video. Bye.